Now, one of the most popular types of video I ever upload on YouTube is about shooting in poor light or at night, and in the context of sports photography, obviously. Now, the reason that these videos always do so well and create so much engagement and discussion in the comments is that shooting in poor light is a challenge that all of us as photographers, as sports photographers, have to get over and find a way with dealing with, and for coming up with the best possible solution to it. So over the last few videos, over the last couple of years really, I've had so many bits of feedback and comments and suggestions in the comments that I thought during a recent game I shot at night, I would take some of these suggestions as well as methods I've used previously and put them all into this video and share the results in this video with you, hopefully to give you some ideas or some suggestions of where you could potentially improve your own nighttime sports photography. So let's jump right in. And we're going to start with a bit of an old digital photography debate, RAW versus JPEG. Now let me give you firstly a quick history of myself, and this will become relevant, I promise. I've been shooting professional football here in England for about 10 to 12 years now. For the first 10 years, I shot exclusively in JPEG. I didn't really swerve away from that. I was happy, apart from when I shot at night, but by and large, I was happy with that. Now, a couple of years ago, I started to have some focusing issues, and if you watched any of my videos at the time, you'll have seen that I went through quite a few different steps to try and identify what that was. Long story short, it was a lens issue, but during the troubleshooting phase of that particular issue, I switched to shooting to RAW, and because it was toward the end of the season when the light's better, I really enjoyed it. I got better results, and thus I stuck with it ever since. Even when I changed cameras or upgraded my camera to a used 1DX Mark II, right in the sweet spot of that kind of troubleshooting period, I continued to use RAW for all of my shooting. And yes, I know there are a load of downsides to doing so, but a lot of upside as well. However, I became so wrapped up in using RAW that I turned a blind eye to some of the problems that it could create, especially when shooting in low light. Well, RAW isn't a problem per se. And before we continue at this point, I just want to say thank you and well done to those guys who in the comments on videos over the last couple of years have said that RAW might not be the best solution when shooting in poor light, and I'm going to discuss why right now. So the problem with RAW at night, when you're using it to shoot on poor light or at night time, is that it appears to introduce more noise into your images. And as I say, a couple of you rightly pointed this out from time to time in the comments. So let's talk about noise, something we all face in our images. And if you are new to photography, noise is the name given to that real grainy distortion and speckles of light that you can see in photos, normally when you've shot them in bad light, but not exclusively is that the case. So let's compare these two shots from this game I shot recently side by side. Now, they are different shots because I was testing RAW at one point and JPEG for another, but they are taken within 5 or 6 minutes of each other in the same lighting, in the same weather, from the same position, using the same gear. Now, the image shot in RAW on the left there is super noisy versus the nice clean JPEG. This is because there is no noise reduction taking place in camera when you're shooting in RAW. No processing at all, in fact. As the name states, they are raw images. This allows you to do so much more with them in post when you're editing. However, if you've shot at night, like I have here, and you're purely using editing files, then you're going to get a whole load of that unprocessed noise unless you're using some sort of denoising software or plugin when you are editing. Now, when you're live editing and sending a pitch side, as I do, using plugins or certainly different software isn't always that useful. I'm going to come back to some inbuilt Lightroom functionality in a few minutes' time. So here again is that JPEG image from the game, clean, processed, and much easier on the eye. And if I just quickly pull up a RAW image from a previous game that I've since saved in JPEG, so post-editing if you like, without any denoise being done, and compare that with this JPEG straight out of the camera from the most recent game, you can see the levels of noise is just incomparable. It is so much lighter in the JPEG. Now that is vastly reduced because my 1DX Mark II does have some pretty decent noise reduction technology inside it. So when it is spitting out a JPEG, it is doing so with some of that noise reduction automatically applied. So that would be tip one. If you're shooting in RAW at night, try a few test shots in JPEG just to see what your camera is capable of in terms of hammering some of that noise and giving you a cleaner image as a result. In weather conditions and the light I've been shooting in recently, as I say, the difference seems so significant, and it's probably my own fault for not going back to purely JPEG at an earlier point. Now, I know I've merely skirted around the topic of noise in this first bit of the video. We are going to talk about it a little bit more in the next few minutes. It's probably also worth me covering in a future video as well. So noise, we will definitely come back to. The next tip was to underexpose the image and then lift it back up a little bit when you are editing it after the game. A couple of comments in recent months have suggested that they like to underexpose the image ever so slightly, and then when they get to editing that image after the game or maybe during the game, that's when they lift the exposure back up slightly. And in some camera bodies, in some scenarios, that does reduce the noise versus cranking the ISO up maybe and making the original image that more accurate exposure. Bringing back to my last point though, RAW versus JPEG, if you are shooting in RAW and you underexpose, it is technically the underexposing of an image that creates noise. So if you're doing that in RAW and then you're lifting it as well, then you are going to get possibly even more noise. But certainly in JPEG and with some cameras, that is definitely a good solution, and one I used to use an awful lot, especially the team I shoot wear predominantly a white kit. So I would underexpose an image, knowing that also at night I could drag down the shadows of the crowd and make the white kit stand out a little bit more and work a little bit better. But that would be a whole conversation about shadows and highlights, of which this video isn't. But underexposing could be an interesting way of helping get a photo with less noise in it. Here's an example from the game where I did just that. I underexposed this image on the left, and then when I brought it up, it looked like the one on the right. Again, I've done this in both RAW and JPEG. So here's that process in RAW with the before and after. Worth saying at this point, when you do increase the exposure in editing software such as Lightroom or Photoshop afterwards, it can still create like a noise type effect and distort your image. So again, test your camera and your conditions and your editing software. There's no one size fits all solution in any of this. Every time you go out with your cameras, the lighting is likely to be slightly different unless you're in an indoor controlled environment, and everyone is using such an array of different cameras, it's impossible to kind of pin one technique, but there is another one you could try for sure. Next is mask and luminance. Now, one commenter said in my recent video that they actually mask an image in the detail section of Adobe Lightroom and then also sometimes add extra luminance into the image to try and blend or hide some of the noise that is in the image. It's not a technique that I was familiar with, I'll be entirely honest with you, but I did reply and say I'm going to try this. So I haven't tried the luminance part yet, but here is me kind of zooming into this image here. It's not the noisiest image, to be fair, the light was okay at this point. But zooming into this image, you can see there's some very slight changes when you do lift that masking up. So that is another solution definitely to keep in mind. When I was playing with this, I also, the way the background was going darker and hiding some of that noise made me instantly think of contrast. So something you can combine with this potentially just to not maybe reduce the noise, but to lift the subject out your image, is just to crank that contrast up a little bit as well. So mask the image using the slider in a detail section and then maybe just lift the contrast a bit as well. As I say, the original commenter, and thank you very much for the comment, did suggest that also after doing the masking, they maybe pop a little bit extra luminance in there as well. So by all means, give that one a try. Next up is AI denoise, and in the world we live in now where AI is seemingly taken over so very many of our processes, certainly digitally, it's not a surprise that Lightroom has got AI denoise functionality baked into it. Full disclosure, I'd used it maybe twice to play around with recently, not really to properly get into the meat and drink of whether this is suitable to use for editing sports photos shot at night. And there's good news and bad news on this, and I'll qualify the bad news when I get to it. But let's start with the good news. So as you can see here, the difference it makes before and after is actually massive. It does an unbelievably good job in Lightroom Classic using that Denoise tool of getting rid of a load of noise and making the image much closer to the JPEG I showed you before, in terms of that has had that denoising kind of technology applied to it. It's cleaner, okay, some of the focus might get a tiny bit softer, but overall, by the time this is shrunk down to a publishable size, be it on website or in print, that isn't going to be a problem at all, and it definitely does a great job of cleaning the image up. So that was the good news. If you've got Lightroom, try it out. Here's the bad news, and it might be a personal experience of mine, but when I was trying this out, and I'll put the process on screen now, albeit sped up, it literally took 2 to 3 minutes per image for this to work. And I was doing it on raw images because, as we discussed earlier, the JPEG has already had noise compression done to it in camera, if you like. So I was using it on a big full-size raw image, and it took ages. Now, it could have been that my laptop is just creaking because I'm constantly editing videos and editing photos. But as part of my workflow, if that's normal, that's never going to work. I've never got 2 or 3 minutes to work on a photo when I'm covering a game, certainly a pitch side, when I'm sending images, so a team scores a goal, within a minute I'm editing that set of photos of the goal and the celebration and sending it into the club to go on social media within a minute to the goal. 2-3 minutes to denoise each image, that ain't going to work at all. Often when you're shooting sports events, you're going to be shooting hundreds of images. Easily, you can shoot over 1,000 depending on the type of event, and if you're shooting maybe a big cup final in the evening, you could really get to 2,000 or something photos, which I've probably only ever done on cup final days when I've been shooting all day, but it is easy done. If you get a game full of goals, you could very quickly get a lot of images there. And if that's how long it takes to denoise them, easy for me to say, then that won't really work as part of a workflow, or not in my opinion. But please give it a try and comment below how that works for you. And the last thing that I get quite often in my comments is that it's probably time for me to change to mirrorless cameras. Well, if we lived in a perfect world where we've all got unlimited budgets, that would definitely be the case. But right now, I'm not there yet, and I'm still shooting on DSLRs, as a lot of you will be watching this video. So mirrorless will do a great job at reducing a lot of the noise, certainly the higher up you go in terms of the spec and the level of the mirrorless camera you buy. But for now, that isn't an option for me. But thank you for the suggestion anyway. And that's all for this particular video. I hope you found that useful in terms of just giving you a few tips and live results, if you like, of different ways you could approach your next game or next competition event that you shoot at nighttime or inside under particularly low light. Try shooting in JPEG off the bat, reduce the exposure when you're taking the photo, try masking it, try denoise, and if all else fails, buy a mirrorless camera. I wish I could. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on the next video.